Hey everyone, this is WobblyWallaby. Today I'm going to attempt some difficult PvE instances with Doram and Ragnarok Mobile. I'll let you know if it's worth investing in. This will be episode 1 of my series where I'll be testing on various classes and challenging PvE instances to help with my PvE tier list. Many people have abandoned Doram, but I never quite gave up on it. I still invest in it every now and then. In fact, Physical Doram was my first guide I created nearly 4 years ago on this channel, so there's a special place for Dorams in my heart. So 4 years later, I'll show you what an endgame Doram looks like. I'll show you some footage and give some analysis first, then show a complete sample build afterwards. I will also include a detailed breakdown of the critical stats required for these instances. Here against the Legend Dragon, it was more difficult than I thought. I went for a DPS build and not a survivability build, so I had to use potions quite often. This is quite a struggle, and in the end we double KO, so luckily my summons definitely dealt with it at the end. The skill delay and lack of fast ticks per second also makes it less ideal when compared with other classes like Klitzberg, Liu Maoxing, or Infernal Armor. Next, here's my Legend Golem run. This was definitely much more smooth. Doram is able to hit critical stats for ignore defense quite well with skills like Meow Grass and Cat Sight. Unfortunately, Dorams don't have skills or passives that boost penetration percentage or skill damage, so you'll need gears and gadgets to fill that role. The golem goes down quite quickly, and some of these crit hits are quite high. Doram can also convert all their damage, so dealing double damage against weaker elemental types is quite easy to achieve. Next, floor 2 is also quite easy since it's a single boss who does damage quite slowly. Things are definitely avoidable, plus you have an anti-death skill as well. Now, where the trouble begins is floor 3. Here I'll show a failed attempt first just to show you how bad it was. The first phase isn't too bad. It's the second phase where the survivability is really hard. I'm constantly being hit by near insta-kill stuff and a bunch of AoEs. Being able to deal AoE helps a lot, which is why I chose the physical one build over the single target dagger build, which I briefly played around as well. So this first attempt failed. I just wanted to be transparent that it was indeed hard. Next, I'll show you a run where this worked. First I cast Prepare for Elite, then Shrimp Pond for boosting my damage, Catman Powder for reduced damage, and Lunatic Gunner. Then I drag the boss over. Once the boss goes down, I run towards the side of the map and recast Catman Powder and Shrimp Pond. I target Drake and take him down quickly. Then I take down the Corrupted Energy Orb. And then next I try to burst down the heart. For the last phase, surviving is key, so eat potions wherever I can. I also run away from the green pond coming near me. I cast Dried Lifesaver Fish at the end as an anti-death to avoid dying, because it really does suck when you die just at the end. Next I'll go back to Museum. Floor 2 was where I got stuck. After probably 10 tries I gave up, but here I'll show you some footage of a failed attempt. The boss itself isn't that hard, it really is the rook that's the annoying part, because if you don't kill it fast enough you will be instant killed. For classes that do well here, they hit at a very high rate to take down the rook. Unfortunately for Doram, the skill cooldown and delay is still too high, so if I compare it against other S tier meta classes, I'd say not clearing floor 2 is a deal breaker for me. Next, for PSR, I also find Doram doesn't have enough debuffs to take down the dragon quickly. Classes like Klitzberg shred through this dragon quickly. So again, since it doesn't do very well in PSR, it's also kind of a deal breaker when it comes to PvE. And the same goes for Ghost Palace. Here's where you see Doram damage really lacking. The damage reduction is also affecting it quite a bit even though you can convert. And then finally for Western Airstrip 15, I can barely hurt the mobs, but that's the same for my Klitzberg as well. Unfortunately, you do need to take support to take down these mobs. Very few classes can actually solo this or do very well with just one support. Now, even if you can't solo everything, Doram is quite good as a support character. It is especially good for helping out magic classes as they can heavily buff them. But if you want to solo, I wouldn't recommend Doram. I think Dorams need better debuffs to make the targets weaker, and also ignore defense alone isn't enough. I think hitting other critical stats like skill damage or penetration will really help them out a lot. Also, I did try Magic Doram, and unfortunately Ghost type prevents them from soloing these. Your force neutral damage will barely scratch them, and so Magic Doram is fine for PvP, but I would not recommend it for PvE. In the end, being able to convert as a physical damage user is the most flexible option. But even with this, I still like playing Doram, so even though it's not the best character, it still does quite well. Next, I'll go over my most successful build, and if you're curious about trying it out yourself, definitely check this out. I am using 3630 to attack with 145% deposit. One important note is I made a video where I use a 15% deposit Klitzberg to solo similar stuff. So Doram is much more balanced than Klitzberg, and a 15% deposit Doram has no chance. So sadly, this is where even a Doram with high deposits can't quite deal with hero classes that exist. Those hero classes definitely power creep a lot of traditional classes. Next, let's look at attributes. For attributes, I max Vit for survivability, as well as it increases some damage as well. Then the rest is into Dex and Agility. You can choose to add more into Agility if you like to crit more from the Life Burst rune, but I choose to balance it out with Dex. Next for stats, I have 30,000 attack, (61.5% penetration, 54.5% skill damage increase, 209.8% damage, 51.5% physical damage increase, 200.9% ignore defense, and I have 113% water damage. Next, here are the ideal stats for the tough instances. I'll put a link in the description if you want to know how these critical stats were determined. I'll do a breakdown of my critical stats and then I'll show my gear in detail after. To get 61.5% penetration, it was difficult because Dorams don't have things that give it penetration percentage. I got my big boost from the Kate star card, which adds 15, then the new gacha Frozen Fruit, which gave 11.5. It scales with strength, dex, and int. You also get 20% from guild buffs, so definitely invest in this with priority. Additional sources include the Combustible Knife from the Oracle Mirror and the Andre star card. You can also use penetration percentage accessories and armor, although I would recommend the elemental increase instead since that makes a big difference. Also, the Ancient Artifact User card gives 10% penetration versus MVP and minis, and that doesn't get reflected in these stats either, so I'm actually closer to 71.5% penetration. Next is skill damage. Again, Doram doesn't have any skill damage help as well. I have to rely on gachas to provide a lot of skill damage, same with the Ancient Equipment, Garment, and Shadow Equipment. Now if you don't have a Refined 15 weapon, you also miss out on the 5% skill damage, which is quite a lot. There are other sources as well. The Xanabia card is a great one, but it's so incredibly expensive. Next is Ignore Defense. My calculation is off by about 1%. I'm not sure where that missing Ignore Defense is, but it should be 200.9%. Also, I didn't include Meowgrass, which gives you 30% Ignore Defense, and you can have 2 of these as well. Personally, casting these takes away from my DPS, so I choose to be at 200% and lower my damage. Vicious Wound is definitely not ideal, and having a penetration percentage or a ranged physical damage Ancient Equipment would be better. But this also includes how much morale and chance you have. If you don't have a lot like me, then it's definitely much more difficult to get away from Vicious Wound. Next is Elemental Damage. I use either water or fire for these tough instances. The fire sources would be very similar, I basically swap in different accessories. The key thing here is to use Elemental Armor and accessories, those add a ton of damage. You can also eat alloys if you want some temporary elemental damage boosts. Next, I'll go into my gear in detail. For offhand, I use Vicious Wound with 30% Ignore Defense random attribute because I lack Ignore Defense and chose the Elemental Armor, so this was my trade-off. Next for card, I use the Ancient Artifact User card for damage to MVPs and minis, and the penetration percentage against MVPs and minis too. Next for armor, I use the Other Shore Patrol for the elemental damage increase. I also have the Morale 2 enchant here, ideally you have the Morale 4 enchant. Next for card, I use the Heart card for the damage to minis and MVPs. You can use the Poitata Star card if you don't have the Fire Era Seed relic. Next I use Leader's Pauldron for the Ignore Defense and Skill damage. I have the 12% skill damage random attribute. For card, I use the Kate Star card for the penetration percentage. Next for footgear, I use the Dragon Slayer War Boots for the attack percentage and the penetration percentage. I have the Beast Storm Star card, which can proc the Tornado Storm for huge movement speed boost when using Savage Soul. You can also do more Savage Soul damage when you're on the Tornado Storm's path. Next for my first accessory, I use the Fluorite button with the 12% water attack random attribute for more water damage. Next for a card, I use the Liu Mao Xing card for damage to MVP and mini monsters. You can definitely replace these with cheaper cards that deal extra damage to certain elements or races. For my second accessory, I use the Emerald button for the same reasons as before, for more water damage. I use the Moonlight Tendrillion Star card for skill damage. Next for weapon, I use the Refined 15 Fine Pink Foxgrass. This is the best weapon for using Savage Soul and Lunatic Carrot Pound. Ideally, you have a Morale 4 enchant here for more Ignore defense. The tier 5 effect is quite nice since it reduces the Lunatic Carrot Pound cooldown and cast delay. You can also deal more damage if you have more HP. For cards, I use the Drake Star card and the Menorah Star card, which is ideal for dealing more damage against large size MVPs. Next for headwear, I use the Holy Knight Blessing for the skill damage. I use the Machine Dragon Wing card for more damage to MVP and minis. Next I use the Winter Crown for more skill damage. Next I use Frozen Fruit, which is great for adding more penetration percentage. Next for back I use Chicken Axe, which does more damage to monsters and also increases target's damage taken for 5% and stacks 2 layers. Next I use this Too Late for the skill damage. On Tornado Storm, your drone will have max movement speed, so your skill damage will easily be at the max of 10%. Next for Shadow Equipment, I definitely don't have the ideal ones. I'll briefly go through it since I didn't have a lot of time to invest in this. I use the Helion Bracelet for more ranged physical damage. I use God's Blessing for more HP. I use White Duke's Manteau for the skill damage and Ignore defense. I use St. Mary's Claw Shoes for the attack percentage. I use Dog Servant for the ranged physical damage. I use Ring of Contract for more attack percentage. Next for Oracle Mirror, I use the build for damaged MVPs. For defensive Oracle Mirror, I use Deathcat Armor for the silence and stun resist. Next for Relic, I use the Era Fire Seed. This is the best in slot for relics in PvE. If you don't have this, Lord of Vayne is good too. Next for memory equipment, the first line being a physical attack percentage or Ignore defense is fine. The defensive one is up to you. I chose an elemental reduction one. And the most important one is to get the final damage increase one for the third one, but you do need to complete Ignore defense to activate this. I only have one of these memory equipments and I'm trying my best to get the rest of these to have the ideal third line. Next are my Advanced Ruins. First is Seafood Pond Ruin. It's great for adding lots of extra damage. I prefer a high second line. Next is the Life Burst Ruin, the mandatory rune to get the third line to play physical 1 Doram. A high first line helps with the critical chance, so ideally a higher one is what you want to aim for. Next is Fresh Tuna Ruin. This is optional for the self heal, it's definitely a nice to have. Next is Life Bond Ruin Star Ruin, another mandatory rune with the third line. Using a skill twice is important for boosting your DPS, and having a high second line is great too. Next is Savage Soul Assault Ruin. A high second line is ideal for a lower cooldown time. Next is Buggy Quick Strike Ruin for giving more agility. I like faster movement speed, so a higher second line is ideal for dodging stuff. Next for Arcane Runes, Spirit Rune is great for SP recovery. I hate to run out of SP in instances, especially if a boss is draining my SP. Next, White Blade Rune is ideal for dealing more damage when there's only one enemy around. Next, the Ward Preparedness Rune is ideal for getting a self shield when damaging targets. Next, here are my skills. First are my Witch skills. Next are my spiritualist skills. Next are my summoner skills. Lunatic Hairpound has a nice cast time these days with the tier 5 weapon. A 1 second cast cooldown and 1 second cast delay definitely makes it very good. Next are my spirit summoner skills. Selfish Soul has a fairly slow cooldown, so the rune to reduce the cast delay helps a ton. Next are Spirit Whisper skills get everything. Next, in my Prepare for Elite, I have Stoop for damage reduction, Soul Bead which grants more attack, health, and attack range. Next, Shrimp Swamp for more raw attack. Next, Curled Beetle Charge for more agility and movement speed. Next, Meow Meow for more movement speed increase. Next, Night Vision for seeing hidden monsters. Next, Natural Rage for summons to attack faster. This basically helps your Lunatic Gunner. Next in my manual bar I have Meowgrass for the ignore defense, Shrimp Pond for the damage increase, Catmint Powder for reduced damage from targets, Dried Lifesaver Fish for anti-death, Prepare for Elite, and Lunatic Gunner. For auto attack I have Lunatic Hairpound and Savage Soul. Well, that's all. Good luck if you decide to play Doram. As much as I love Doram, it's still not a viable DPS at the moment for many instances. It doesn't have S tier damage, so it's closer to A tier. Even if it's not great for DPS, it still is able to help out in a party. It's especially good for helping out your magic classes, and for helping reduce the requirements for ignore defense and ignore magic defense with Meowgrass. Stay tuned for another episode in the future where I'll cover a different class going through the same challenges. Hopefully it'll be able to do well, but even if it doesn't, it's still a lot of fun to try things out. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Here's a video that I recommend, and if you want more Dorm guides, check out this playlist over here.